Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Throughout today's presentation, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. To ask a question at that time, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Mr. Jared Liu. Sir, you may begin.
Great, thank you, and thanks to everyone for joining us. This is the Thursday webcast series. It's a bi-monthly webcast held at the lunch hour. The trainings leverage local successes by amplifying to a larger audience to model organizations, methods, materials, and approaches. Sessions are planned to last no more than 1 hour, with 2 presenters speaking on the same topic from slightly different perspectives, each for about 10 to 15 minutes, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of questions and answers. Today's session is approved by the ISA for 1 CEU hour and by SAF for 1 CFE Category 2. If you haven't already given me your certification number, please email me after this session. Also, most state landscape architecture boards require only a certificate of completion, which Alliance for Community Trees can provide to members who request this. This is a program of the Alliance for Community Trees, and we encourage you to consider joining if you're not a member. We want to thank our sponsors for today's call, the Home Depot Foundation and the USDA Forest Service. With that, today's session is Green Partnerships with Business. This session is specifically focused on major corporations. Partnering with a major corporation can provide your organization with a steady source of funding, guidance, and credibility. Despite the current economy, large companies remain highly interested in corporate responsibility, community impact, and going green. Urban forestry nonprofits are well-positioned to leverage the values of trees to satisfy those interests, making this a prime time for your organization to develop its relationship with local corporations. Today's first speaker is Teresa Rhodes. Teresa is the Director of Investment Opportunities for Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, a well-recognized organization which unites people to build community and transform spaces through environmental improvement. Teresa has devoted 20 years as a development and marketing professional, 9 of which have been with Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. Her work at KIB has included raising millions of dollars, brand development, marketing, strategic planning, and program development. Since Teresa's tenure, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful has tripled its income and quadrupled the number of investors. Her experience also includes development and marketing for a national public policy think tank, working on Capitol Hill for a U.S. Senate campaign committee. Teresa identifies a few of her primary values as curiosity and connection with a healthy dose of flexibility. She likes to boiler it up as a graduate of Purdue University. She grew up in Indianapolis, where most of her immediate family currently resides, and we are pleased to have Teresa with us today.
Thank you very much, Jared, and thanks everyone else for tuning in. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about our corporate outreach program. I wanted to just sort of do an overview of KIB for those of you who aren't familiar with us. I'll go through that quickly and then get into the meat of today's discussion. And essentially, KIB is a nonprofit. We have been in existence for to our mission, you'll see here. I've been in existence since 76, started as a city agency, and in the 80s became a nonprofit. Our mission is to unite people to build community and transform public spaces through environmental and aesthetic improvement. I know ACT has a diversity of members. We do tree planting is a big portion of what we do. We do a lot more as well, as you can see on this next slide. Just threw this in here so you could get a grasp of the activities that our organization is involved in. And I think it's important to say that maybe for those that are focused solely on tree planting, having a number of different program opportunities for corporate groups actually is a benefit for us. Our budget is about $3 million a year. So if you look at, we do litter cleanup, green space, tree planting, of course, pocket park programs, schools, creating outdoor classrooms at schools. We have about 45,000 volunteers a year. That number bumped up pretty significantly when we added Eli Lilly as a corporate sponsor, and I'll talk a little bit about that partnership as we get into this. What I wanted to focus on is this next slide and telling the story. And I think it's really important in any discussion we have with prospective investors is to make sure that we communicate our vision and that it is believable, that we live it, and that we share it. And you'll probably hear me say multiple times in this presentation, it's really important to tell your story. And so we try to tell it whenever we can. And we also, when we tell our story, focus on our impact. We want to make sure that people understand our philosophy is that impact drives income, not the other way around. And so when we're telling our story about keeping Indianapolis beautiful, we're always focused on what we're trying to accomplish, why we exist, and how we impact the local community. And that's essentially the next point is connecting dollars to action. So letting people know that by partnering with KIB, they're able to change the world through our organization. And our message, we attempt to always make it clear, concise, and compelling so that people will remember it. Essentially, our vision is about transformation. And I think it's really important that that's communicated clearly to anyone, especially corporate groups. We are looking at transforming people, transforming the community, and transforming the environment, with the ultimate being a better city. And so most everything, when you look on our website and our materials, should all have that element included and prominent. And, of course, it's a keystone to our discussions that we have with our corporate partners. And the next sort of here, I'm going back to telling the story. One of the efforts that we started to promote internally was that all of our staff, our board, our friends understood who we are and what we're about and can communicate it well in a way that others can understand and love. And I think that's really important. We made sure that everyone here was on the same page, essentially, so that when people would go out and talk about our organization, it was consistent, again, compelling and clear, and that it created a buzz. And so people were hearing the same story over and over again from a multitude of people. And we also wanted to make sure that there was conversation forming around our cause. So we do a lot of web, social media, that sort of thing. I'm just wanting to, I'm sorry, if anyone has questions, ask me later. I'm kind of breezing through these things quickly, but I just wanted to sort of give an overview of how we position ourselves in the community. This next slide is actually our corporate recruitment piece. Essentially, what we use, it's a brochure that Jared kindly put it up here because I couldn't figure out how to make it look pretty, and he did for me. But essentially, this is really a leave-behind piece. What you're seeing, the four people with the shovels, is actually the front of the brochure. On the left is actually the back of the brochure, and I'll forward it, and you'll see the internal part of the brochure. But we use this primarily as leave-behinds when we have meetings with prospective partners. We distribute them at booths. We have them, in any kind of meeting. We have them displayed here at our office. We get a lot of people coming through our office here. And we make sure that they're in packets that we send out to people. So essentially, this is kind of encapsulates how we recruit corporate partners. And I'm not going to go through it. You can look at that at your leisure. I know we're looking at time constraints. Essentially, one thing that I do talk about whenever I sit down with corporate folks is creating a mutually beneficial partnership, because typically people who sit down with us have a list of goals that they're trying to achieve, and we have a list of goals that we're trying to achieve. So my tactic always is to understand what the corporate goals are, and then to somehow marry them in a way that's beneficial for achieving our mission as well as achieving their goals. And so that's sort of captured here in this leave-behind piece that we have. The next thing I always think about is people here at work probably get sick of me talking about it, but I always come back to why do we exist? And I think that's the most important question to ask yourself, because it will drive all the conversations you have, all the print material you have, your website, all conversation that's happening around the organization. And again, I'm just trying to get to distilling the essence of why we exist and why it's important for people to invest in us. So this, again, is going back to making sure you have a story to tell and making sure that people can understand it, And the other thing is a lot of people, when they feel frustration with the message not getting across, they'll change the message. And I always advocate for, if you have the message that's true to your organization, it's a matter of repeating it over and over again so people actually begin to understand it. And then the second point, know what they want. It's not always what we want. And I'm sure for any of those that are on this call have experienced that over and over again. And you get to a point sometimes where you're thinking, we're trying to get money for this program, and this organization wants something that looks a little bit different. How do we make it so that it meets both of our needs? And sometimes, not very often, we will chase after dollars based on what's available, especially in terms of, if a certain corporation wants to be in a certain area. But typically we don't. We stay pretty true to the recipe that works for our organization, which is grassroots driven from the bottom up, and then we work to get folks or corporations to sponsor it. But it's important to know that sitting down with a corporate prospect, that oftentimes you're looking at things a little bit differently. And with that in mind, we always take the long-term approach, which is it could take multiple meetings before you actually get to the point where both sides are like, oh, yes, this will work for us. Or it could be just the wrong timing. One year we may not have the flexibility to change a project to suit a corporate partner's interests. We may be able to the next year. So I think that's another important approach that we always have with corporations, which is always that we are entering into a long-term relationship. It's a courtship, which takes a long time, and we feel that when you have that mentality, that the likelihood of a long-term relationship is much greater. The last point here being ask, ask, ask. I may depart from some of those on the call or in this regard, but I do believe that development is essentially very similar to sales, and you have to ask, and you have to be comfortable with what you're asking for, and you have to also understand that you need to ask for something that's within the realm of possibility for your corporate prospect. But ultimately, you got to ask, or it's just not going to happen. The next slide is I wanted to just give some examples. I know Peter's going to give some case study information when he talks. I wanted to just go over some of these that are on here since we're talking about major corporations. Existing partnerships that we have is with IPL, is our local power company, and we've been working with them since '95. They are a title sponsor for our green space project. And essentially, we've got a terrific relationship with them. I think that in terms of the tree planting, like a lot of other power companies, they cut a lot of trees. And so here, I think a lot of it is aligning with us because it establishes goodwill in the community. With Lilly, Eli Lilly and Company, it's headquartered here in Indianapolis. They're a powerhouse in the community. They are tapped all the time from numerous nonprofits in the city. We had been working with them on a small scale. They were donating anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year to our organization to sponsor green space projects, some tree planting incorporated with that. And they internally decided they wanted to do sort of a day of service, and they approached KIB, and I will tell you that the first person they talked to on our staff essentially said, no, thank you, we don't want to partner with you. And then we had some more internal discussions and thought we better rethink that. And fortunately, we did, because that grew into a huge partnership now that accounts for almost 60% of our budget in terms of the gift that they give to us. And we manage about 8,000 of their employees. One day they go out into the community here in Indianapolis, and they are planting hundreds of trees. In October, they're going to be planting thousands of trees. Perennials, painting murals. They did the longest World Guinness Book of Records, longest paint-by-number mural in the world, partnering with us. So it's a huge, huge, huge partnership. The good thing is it's out of pocket. Most of that money is out of pocket. So if that partnership were to diminish or to shift in some way, shape, or form, it really won't impact the size of our organization. It will impact the work that we're doing now. I don't want to take, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through this. Roche is a good example of an organization that in Indianapolis, they really don't have a high profile. And we have our Neighborhoods program, our tree planting effort, has a United States Senator that's one of our honorary co-chairs, and he was coming to speak at KIB. We arranged an event, and I reached out to the folks at Roche to say, would you like to attend? And that was sort of the opening, having using Senator Lugar's name was an opening for Roche that piqued their interest. And now we're in a multi-year partnership with them. It's a 5-figure partnership. So that's an example of how we used an affiliation with someone to open a door. Another way that corporate groups come to us at Wells Fargo is a good example is we had an article in the paper about local accounting firm who had done a day of service with us, and we got a number of calls after that. And one of them was Wells Fargo, and they were interested in volunteering. And essentially, what we do is when we get volunteer groups from corporations that come to us that we think have the capacity to be a financial sponsor, we will the development or the volunteer coordinator essentially will funnel those calls to the development team, and then we will follow up with them. And Wells Fargo was an example of that happening. And we followed up with them, gave them an opportunity told our story, gave them an opportunity to invest, and they made a 5-figure commitment to us. So we get a lot of our corporate leads through our volunteer stream. We have been not as good in the past about really vetting that stream of prospects, and we are actually getting better at that and being more targeted. And then lastly, I put random. We get some random, I'm sure some of you do as well, get these, Cat Sapper Miller KSM was a phone call that just sort of came out of the blue, and they are entering now. This is our 2nd year of partnering with them. They did a day of service with us, and we have every reason to believe that's going very well, and that'll continue. Office Works is another organization here in town that we're having the Super Bowl in 2012, hence the logo at the bottom, and Office Works became aware of our tree planting effort related to the Super Bowl. They contacted Super Bowl people. They funneled them to us. So that's one that we're still working on. They haven't made a financial commitment at this point. And then another way that we end up with corporate partners, of course, is with the strong relationship that Home Depot has with ACT and being able to go through the funding opportunities that exist through being a member of ACT and submitting for support from them. How am I doing on time, Jared? Am I nearing the end?
You're great.
Okay. All right, so the next and last thing is really about retention. And I'm a big proponent of once you get them, you do whatever you can to make sure that they're pleased and that they stay. As I said earlier, I sit down, every corporate prospect I sit down with, I'm taking a long-term approach, believing that it will be a long-term relationship. When possible, we will seek multi-year partnerships. I shouldn't even say when possible. We always seek a multi-year partnership. It just depends on who we're meeting with. We have a number of Kroger's a multi-year partnership, Lily's a multi-year partnership, Roche is a we have several that are multi-year partnerships, and then several that we ask, and they're just not in the position to make that sort of commitment. But once we've got a partner, we do a really good job of sort of working with them and making sure that we are understanding what their goals are. When I talk about internal and external goals, I found that a lot of corporate groups do have internal goals. So they may be, for instance, Roche might be an example. Roche internationally has a very strong commitment to sustainability and environment. So the Indianapolis office may want to get involved with us because then they can report and quantify what activities they've been involved with on a local level that may meet certain standards that they have internationally. So there are internal goals oftentimes that corporate groups have, as well as external goals, which is creating goodwill in the community with their customer base, with their vendors, with whomever they're looking to position themselves well with. And there's a lot of talk about cause-related marketing. I think that we essentially keep that in mind when we're sitting down with corporate groups. Again, it's about partnering with them and seeking their investment and having a mentality of we're in this together. It's not a us versus them. It's KIB versus the other organization. It's a discussion around us and what we can do together. And so I always make sure that we are co-owners of these projects that we're engaged in and that they are sharing in, again, the mission, the message, by investing in our organization. We typically do a debrief for projects, and maybe I haven't been clear. I'd say a majority of those that support KIB also come out and volunteer. So there definitely is that link between volunteering and investing in the organization. And so essentially, especially when we've got larger investors, we will do a debrief afterwards to sort of evaluate the project, what went well, what didn't go well, and then immediately in that conversation start talking about the next year. So we are taking the opportunity to sort of say, are you happy with what was accomplished here? And if so, well, what do you want to do next year? When do you want to plan it, sort of thing? So we continue, it's a dialogue that hopefully never ends. We just continue to keep looking forward as we are planning, evaluating, that sort of thing. The last point here is something that we've been talking about, and if anyone listening has any comments or has had success, I'd be happy to hear them. Eli Lilly is a good example of a corporate partner that is very, very charitable and has been terrific partnering with us. But it's been very difficult to take what is essentially a corporate connection and create an employee human connection. In other words, they've got a lot of staff people that are well paid, and we'd love to be able to figure out how to reach out to their individuals and have them donate to KIB individually. They do match individual contributions. They are also very protective of us soliciting their employees. So our next challenge we've been working through is essentially how we can get their employees personally involved with our organization. A couple points that notes that I made to myself that I didn't talk about here is this notion of people will buy into something big, and this is sort of going back to telling the story and making sure that you have a compelling message. And it's really, we always try to have our conversations couched in terms of this notion of transforming the community, and starting that is sort of our starting point. And then as we have the dialogue to find out if there's particular areas that they're interested in. For instance, now AgriSciences is interested in anything related to water right now. So we're able to then shape the conversation and direct it towards tree planting and watersheds, that sort of thing. So we always start with big and then sort of try to determine what very specific areas are they're interested in. I mentioned Dow AgriSciences, which made me think when I was driving in this morning, thinking about this webinar. I passed what's called Pogues Run here in town. It's sort of a wetland watershed, and essentially we have been doing tree planting along this watershed. And one of the things I think is also important is to talk about marketing and how you market existing programs to make them even more attractive. And we were doing tree planting in Pogues Run, so essentially I started to think about how do we differentiate this and get some excitement around tree planting, which we've been doing for many, many years. And so essentially I couched it in terms of a conservation corridor, and then began to pitch that to different organizations. Dow is a good example of that really resonated with them. Had we just talked specifically about tree planting, it would not probably have been a different conversation than we've been having with Dow for the past 3 years that they've been partnering with us. But to take, maybe look at existing programs and to try to find what's unique about this, or how can you package this in a way that may be, I hate to use the word sexy, but that may really pique people's interest, and they go, oh, conservation corridor, I can buy into that. So we've had a lot of success just recently with sort of taking the tree planting in a watershed to a conservation corridor, and that's generated a lot more interest and actually donations for us. And we've still got some things in the irons in the fire related to that. Same with our Super Bowl. We were doing tree planting on the Near East Side. The Super Bowl is going to be in Indianapolis in 2012. And essentially, instead of talking about tree planting in the Near East Side, we are marketing that effort as 2012 by the 2012 Super Bowl. So our effort is to plant 2012 trees by the 2012 Super Bowl. And that has also generated a lot of interest and investment because people are thinking, oh, this is the way that I can sort of join my company into something big like the Super Bowl. And I think I'm at the end. I'm sorry if I've talked and sort of hit a lot of different points, but I just want to go back to the notion of making sure you're talking in terms of a clear message. For us, it's transforming the community, that you are doing a good job of picking. Oh, I didn't say this. I think it's important. There's so many prospects that you really narrow down who your key prospects are, a handful of them, and really focus on getting into them. I talked about the long-term approach. I think that's really critical to our success, and to make sure you're asking. And I think that's about it. Marketing your programs well, staying in touch with your programs. I also bring program people to some of our visits with corporate sponsors because they're in the trenches, and I also make sure that I'm working on projects myself and out there digging so that I'm really connected to where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So that's it. I know that was quick, and I'm sure there were some random notions coming through my comments, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Carissa, can you open the lines for questions, please?
Sure, and if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please remember to unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. To withdraw your question, please press *2. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1.
Okay, and I'll also mention that if anyone is feeling shy or just would rather type their question in, you can do that at the Q&A manager up at the top, and I can come on the line and read the question for you. Teresa, I wanted to start with, you were talking about what you have to offer, and I'm guessing that what you have to offer is more than just trees or tree planting. But my question is more the way you pitch that to corporations. Does it vary by the corporations, or do you have a certain set of things that you offer?
I think the answer to that is yes, because we do have we have the programs that we have, essentially. So when I should probably step back and say, if I'm meeting with someone who's a prospect, I've usually done my legwork and have figured out what might be of interest to them now. And so when I sit down with in that meeting, I usually have, I sort of have our portfolio of programs, but I come to it with a perspective of knowing what our programs are, but also wanting to understand what their intentions are and why they're interested in having a conversation with KIB. So, it's this typical dialogue. I'm listening to what they have to say. And then at that point, oftentimes what happens is we'll have this conversation. They're interested. This is what they'd like to do. Then I'll come back to our program staff and essentially say, this is what they're interested in. Can we meet those needs? This is their ideal project. Can we do it? If not, what can we do? And so essentially there's an ongoing conversation that happens internally as well as with the corporate partner. And I always do my best to try to make sure we can meet whatever it is they want to do. But if we can't, we can't. It's a competitive process, the projects that we select, and so hopefully it fits with what's on our calendar for the year. And if not, then we may have a conversation for the following year, or they may come in at that's the other thing we do is sometimes if they're not sure, I'll have them come in and do a small volunteer project with a small group of their folks. That's what happened with Cat Sapper Miller. They had a handful of people that came out and volunteered, who really, really enjoyed it and then went back and they closed down their office and they had 400 people come out and do a project with us.
And I'm thinking specifically about, you'd put up a bullet about making that human connection too. And so I'm wondering, do you lead with that? Do you lead with your programs that you do things like tree planting, or do you lead with things like creating healthy places for kids to play, and then talk about how trees support that, or how your programs support those things that are more human-centered?
Yeah, I'm usually coming at it from the 30,000 feet perspective, and then sort of narrowing it down to, through the course of that discussion, an area that I think aligns well with either what they're already involved in or what they've maybe talked about being involved in. Most people, there definitely is a green movement. We're well positioned to capitalize on that. There are not a lot of other nonprofits in Indianapolis that are well positioned in that regard, where people can actually get out personally and do something. So we're capitalized on our unique position in terms of the environment when you're talking about trees. But I think to answer your question, I always talk about the vision. I mean, why is it important that we're planting trees? And then to go more specifically into what they could be doing to help. Does that answer the question?
Great. We have a question online. How is maintenance of ongoing projects handled?
We try to, it's an interesting question. I was supposed to be in a meeting that's going on right now with folks from the Super Bowl and Eli Lilly, because I mentioned earlier, I'm going to answer that question. We have this goal of 2012 trees on the near east side by the 2012 Super Bowl. And our partnership with Lilly could fund all the trees going into the ground, but that's not enough. As we all know, you have to do maintenance. And essentially, it's possible that Lilly could fund the maintenance as well, but this conversation is going to be centered around who else can come to the table and collaborate and share in terms of the maintenance of this project. So maintenance, oftentimes we build it into sort of the corporate sponsorship piece of it. Or we have a youth tree team, and some projects already have maintenance dollars, and a lot of the projects that we do, the neighborhood that we partner with agrees to maintain the projects. So it's a case by case, really.
Okay, Carissa, do you have any questions in queue?
Yes, I do. Jane, your line is open.
Yes, this is Jane Fortune from Tree Fresno. I just wondered if you are all alone in as development director, or do you work? I know that staffs are always very small in these tree organizations. Are you coming back and connecting to the office with your corporations?
Jane, you're asking if we have how many development people we have on staff. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. Yes. Are you alone doing this?
I'm not. Sometimes I feel like I am. No, I'm not at all. We actually have 3 people on the development team. When I started here, essentially it was me and half of another person, and I fought really hard to expand our development functions. And I think that the fact that our income has tripled is a good indication that having more people doing research it bears fruit. But I should say that our president is really engaged, and he's terrific. No one can beat him in terms of talking about our organization. He spends at least 40% of his time in development meetings, and then we've really tried to activate our board with some amount of success. So essentially, and I mentioned earlier that we have program people that I keep involved in the process. So my notion is the more people that know your message and understand it, the more likely that you're going to be making connections that are valuable, that will essentially result in investment. So I know I know there are probably plenty organizations that don't have that many development people, and if you don't, I would say work hard to try to get more people that are devoted towards raising money. And if you can't, then use the people that are there. Program people sometimes are better than development people to make an ask.
Yeah.
So, work with what you have.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Carissa, do you have any other questions in queue?
At this time, there are no questions on the phone.
Okay, great. We'll hold off on other questions and we'll move on to the next speaker, but there may be time at the end for questions for either speaker again. So thank you, Teresa.
Sure.
Okay, our next speaker is Peter Massey. Peter is the Director of Grant Funding at Tree People in Los Angeles. Peter has more than 15 years' experience in all areas of nonprofit management. He oversees funding requests to foundations, corporations, and government grant programs that support Tree People's programmatic and capital needs, and has been involved in raising more than $10 million for the organization. This has included building facilities and gardens at the Tree People Center for Community Forestry, a complete overhaul of website and database systems, a major program expansion including post-wildfire restoration, and school greening. Peter also oversees a committee of very creative staff members charged with finding new ways to implement Tree People's long-term strategic objective within and across the organization. Prior to work with Tree People, Peter served as executive for 2 nonprofit arts organizations in LA and Florida, gaining experience running programs, budgets, administration, and serving as the public face of the organization. He holds a bachelor's from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and an MFA from Florida State University. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Hello. Am I on?
You are on.
All right. Thank you, Teresa. That was excellent. That was really outstanding. I loved everything you had to say. And Jared, thank you so much for putting this series together and for inviting me to be part of it. What I wanted to offer as a follow-up to Teresa's program was just a couple of case studies from Tree People, some more examples, and they really tie in a lot to some of the things that Teresa was sharing, but maybe a little different perspective as well. And let's see, I guess I can move forward here, can't I? Oh, wow, I love how that works. Okay, so very quickly about Tree People. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and support people to take personal responsibility for the urban environment. So our model is very, very much around this issue of personal responsibility, the citizen forester who is going to learn everything he or she needs to learn about urban forestry and all of the other aspects that can now tie into it, you know, related to watershed management and multiple other issues that can now come into the realm of urban forestry. And then to take a long-term responsibility in terms of developing projects, programs, taking care of them long-term. So that's very much our model. It's a very hands-on model and very labor-intensive to get it going, but when it works, it's really beautiful. And, you know, we've got a number of people out there throughout Los Angeles who are essentially, you know, building the urban forest and taking care of it as leaders in the community. And we just love it when it works. It's a model that we've been working with for 20 years, and we learned the hard way that we needed to do it with this particular model. So trying to communicate that model can be challenging, but it also has multiple opportunities. We have 3 major focus areas, one, of course, being our urban forestry work, but not only urban forestry, but also the work that's done in local wilderness areas and local national parks, because, of course, Greater Los Angeles is completely surrounded by a ring of mountain ranges to the north, to the east, and to the south. And we all know this because they, you know, catch fire periodically, and we hear about it, you know, nationally on the news. We also have education programs, and which is primarily K through 12, both public and private. And then we do a lot of public education, you know, through the media, through tours of our facility in Los Angeles, and through other means. We also run a big in-school program under contract with the county, which reaches like 400,000 students a year. So there's a lot of education work, and that gives us opportunities to talk about that. And then our work with watersheds. We've been focused on water-related issues here in Southern California for almost 15 years. And, of course, here that's particularly focusing on increasing our regional water supply, because it is increasingly a scary situation here in Southern California. So our first case study is going to be the Walt Disney Company. And the main overview here is long-term relationship, long-term investment, and how that can pay off over a long period of time, and the steps that we've gone through in our learning process. Two major ingredients here that I think are kind of important to note. One, it's a major corporation, so they have significant resources, but also it's headquartered right here in Los Angeles, and as a matter of fact, headquartered fairly close to where Tree People is headquartered. So there's a local neighborhood feel to this particular relationship, as well as the fact that, you know, it's acknowledging this major international corporation. So this relationship, let's look at it and just kind of feel that there's a certain natural relationship going on here. As I say, we're neighbors to an extent, so there's something very local about it, connection in that regard. And the relationship goes all the way back to 1990, and probably even earlier, but some funding began somewhere around 1990 for a program that we run in conjunction with the State of California Department of Education, where we needed some matching funds. And we have similar interests to Disney in that we have a lot of focus with youth and education and families. And in this particular case, we were actually even able to make use of some educational curricula that had been developed by Disney. Their environmentality program, their Jiminy Cricket environmentality program, which we were able to tie into one of our school programs because it's a curricula for fourth graders. We had a relationship with one of the mid-level managers. This was a person who was very dedicated to the education programs. She was also early on focused on environmental issues, so she was very interested in who Tree People was and what we were doing. And I really have to credit our education director during the 1990s and early part of this last decade for really maintaining a great relationship with this mid-level manager. Her name was Chris. And he kept her in the loop, kept her in contact with her on a lot of things that were going on. She would come to various events, etc. So it was a good relationship. And this was $5,000 annual match to support this countywide school program. This same amount went on for 13 years, just kind of regularly established. Then we took another step forward in trying to cultivate a deeper relationship. We had a new development director come in the early part of the last decade and said, what can we do to further this relationship? And at that point in time, we reached out and found an executive at Disney who was interested in joining our board of directors. This was a major step forward in the relationship. This was a gentleman who had a huge passion for the environment, but was very highly placed within Disney. Senior vice president, oversaw some of the global activities related to marketing. As soon as he was in, he was able to take the sponsorships, $25,000 a year, to support our annual dinner, simply because he was an executive and he could go to the foundation and say, I'm now on their board of directors, I want this sponsorship for this organization. In addition, because he did a lot of marketing work, he lent us his marketing expertise and started saying, how do we talk about the organization? How can we clarify the message? How can we get it down to something that's very simple and clear, because the organization is complex. The organization deals with the complexities of the urban ecosystem. How do we distill that message down as tightly as we can? And he started moving us in a direction of distilling this message as cleanly as possible, and even developed some brochures for us at no cost. He used his Disney designers to create it and print it, and, it was a lovely gift to us that he could use for the board of directors then to share with their friends to better communicate what the organization was about. He also started tapping us into other people within the organization for strategic meetings, brainstorming about schools, talking about the compatibility of their brand and our brand on a local level. What could that mean? And kind of some of the things Teresa was talking about in terms of not necessarily having a clear proposal, but just talking about ideas and working through it and brainstorming. And then, of course, increased use of volunteers, because Disney is really great with volunteer programs. But we really didn't have any clear proposals that came out of this. We continued with the annual support for the dinner, and then the other program that had been supported long-term. Well, then we had what we like to call a significant compelling event. So we had the step forward with the board involvement, now the significant compelling event. We'd been trying to figure something out, and all of a sudden something came to us that was very clear in that a new mayor was elected, and he wanted to launch a million tree campaign here in Los Angeles, and he wanted the local corporations to be involved. So he went to them and said, what can you do to be involved? How can you give money? And in the case of Disney, they said, well, we need to turn to a long-term partner who we can trust in this program, and they came to us and said, we think we found it. We'd like to green a number of schools, as we've been talking about a little bit, and we would like to make an investment of $250,000 over multiple years to green a number of schools, 20 to 25 schools in the Los Angeles area. And then they also kicked this off with a big press event, as you can see from the photo there. To our surprise and delight, they brought along the Jonas Brothers, which was pretty amazing because that's tough for even Disney to do. But the gentleman on the far right there is Bob Iger, who's the CEO of Disney. So when he showed up, then they were able to get the Jonas Brothers to show up. And this was done at a school campus in the inner city. And as you can imagine, the kids at that campus were pretty blown away. It got a lot of press, got a lot of attention, and that's exactly what Disney was hoping to get so that they could show the city and the mayor that they were supportive of this program and that this is the way they were going to support it was through their long-term partnership with Tree People. So we were really delighted. And that's our founder and president over on the left end there, Andy Lipkus, with the mayor of Los Angeles in the middle there. Then a second significant compelling event came along in that relationship because a year later we had several wildfires that broke out in the San Bernardino National Forest, and very significant, had a huge amount of national attention. You know, you could see the photos from satellite. You could see the burn going on. It was so huge and so significant, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres going up. And Disney wanted to support some type of restoration work in this regard. So once again, they turned to us and said, do you have a program? And as a matter of fact, we did have a program. And they said, can you scale it up if we make a major investment? And we said, we'd love to do that and get more and more volunteers and a public interface. So at this point in time, we started having multiple press events to launch this particular program once again. So this is something that Disney was looking for, was the press opportunity to show their support for restoring the forests. It suddenly started increasing even more touch points between staff members and people at Disney, more and more interaction between multiple levels at the corporation and Tree People. It went into a 3-year program for a total of $1.5 million total that they wanted to invest in this. And then to cap it off, we made them the honoree at our annual dinner to kind of kick off that particular program. So that was, let me just step back here. So anyway, that was a dream come true relationship. I think as many of us would agree, that's like, wow. Could we do everyone like that? No, of course we can't do everyone like that. But, boy, it's great when it actually happens. It feels like you've won the lottery. Anyway, so now moving on to case study number 2, which I feel is a little more typical, that I just kind of wanted to talk about. And I call this one Company Z because I don't want to actually mention a name here because it's been a challenging relationship to try to, really get moving. Once again, it's a major international corporation. However, this time, they have a major presence in LA, but they're not headquartered here. So we don't have that neighbor-to-neighbor access to top executives, for example. Next piece here. So then the question becomes, is this a natural relationship that we're looking at with Company Z? So from 2000 to 2003, it was essentially a friendship between the foundation manager and the director of development at the time. They were friends. They'd worked together before on different projects, and so the foundation manager was able to provide some support for the annual dinner. However, the funding interests were a little unclear. They would change from time to time from the headquarters, and frankly, a lot of them seemed to be at the whim of the local foundation manager, if I may be so blunt. And so, we have this kind of questionable relationship here, as the photo might suggest. And then the next period of time, well, we even have a few challenges that show up in the relationship. Cutbacks come from the headquarters so that the local branch doesn't have quite as much money to spend, and they have to cut back. And so suddenly we don't get any grants or sponsorships for a while, even though we continue to have conversations and we continue to make requests and talk about ideas. But still it's like, I want to help you guys, but I just can't right now. And so, I just got too much that's going on, and we hear all kinds of stories, and we keep at it, and we keep sharing our message, and we keep try to be a nice partner and be involved wherever we can. At the same time, Company Z is winning environmental awards, so we know, this is a good relationship because this is a company that at some level has similar interests. So how do we continue to work on it? Well, there was once again the significant compelling event, this time again with the Million Trees Los Angeles program, and Company Z needed to get involved. And this time they said, well, we'll turn to some of the people we know, including 3 people, but their support was not in the form of a grant. It came in the form of a loan, oddly enough. And we said, well, okay, we will accept the loan and then we'll pay it back. And that way, and it was a significantly higher amount, it was like 6 figures. And that way we can at least show ourselves as, participating and working together with them as part of the Million Tree campaign and all of that. So continue to try to promote this relationship. It also gave us a new connection to some of their executives beyond just the foundation manager. And then we tried to put in a request for a board member, but that didn't really go anywhere. But we were trying to take that next step. And then continued cultivation over the last couple of years. And then just recently we had a really small event come up, which is a local office opened just a matter of blocks from our headquarters. So now it's the neighborhood level once again. And the local branch said, gee, could we make a $2,000 grant to you as part of our opening, and will you come to our press event? And so we're going to be there, and we're going to take a board member, and we're going to make a big deal out of it, even though it's just starting off with a $2,000 grant, to try to continue to foster this relationship and see where we can take it and see if this particular opportunity is the right connection working through this particular local branch. So that's kind of more of the up and down and kind of the reality of trying to build a relationship over time and over the long haul. So kind of some points here to consider in the summary. Is it a natural partnership? To what extent is it going to be an easy or a relatively easy growth pattern in terms of the relationship? Do you both have an interest in the long term? Do you both have the ability to kind of stick with it over the long haul? What's the opportunity to engage really at the highest possible level? Is there an executive that you can connect with in some way? Does somebody on your board know somebody at that company that you can tie into and just make a friend of some kind to really get that personal connection? And the other thing is, kind of as Teresa said, ask, ask, ask. I mean, be bold to some extent, but, also be realistic in terms of what's right for your organization and what might seem to be the right match for them. I often don't think of myself as a fundraiser. I think of myself as a matchmaker a lot of times. What's the right match? And then the other thing is, I think the question that was kind of coming up before there is the reality that these relationships take capacity. It's about managing a relationship. There are times when will walk into a staff meeting and say, okay, today I'm actually feel like I'm working for so-and-so, one of our corporate sponsors, because I'm planning so many projects on their behalf, and I'm kind of almost like wearing a hat as though I was one of their employees to say, how does that look? how does Tree People look from their viewpoint, putting on their hat, so to speak. And you really have to gauge, how many of these relationships can we manage, and then be more strategic about, which ones we go after and which ones seem to be the right fit for us. So, right now we're kind of categorizing those to some extent. We're looking at the banks as one area, the financial institutions. We're also looking at local utilities because they have an interest in environmental issues, energy conservation, water infrastructure, all of the things that we're concerned with. So what about the utility companies? What can we be doing with them? And so those are a lot of the approaches we're taking right now, and we're getting some good positive response and good conversations. So that's kind of where we're at with things with these case studies, and that's it. Thanks.
Peter, Carissa, can you open the lines for questions, please?
Sure, and again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly. One moment, please.
It was interesting finishing on that note, Peter, because we do these monthly or quarterly surveys out to members, and one of the things we'd reported in the 2009 member report was that across the board, utilities seem to be the most common relationship that our members had locally, and number 2 was financial services. So, following up on those two. I think I get the message of, the long term and how the cultivation it takes a long time. I'm wondering, with the relationship with Disney, do you know, did Disney ever make a request for a way to grow the relationship that did not fit with Tree People, or were there ways that presented at the time to grow that strategically Tree People decided to continue on that $5,000 level with until the Million Trees and some of these other projects came along that fit better?
I think there were approaches and trying to do some outreach to them to try to grow that relationship, like during the 90s, that didn't seem to go anywhere, and didn't seem to have the strongest links, perhaps. Once we got into the deeper conversations with the board member and some of the other executives, especially foundation staff at Disney, then we had to do some more brainstorming, and it seemed like we didn't have the right match. And so therefore we didn't really pitch anything specifically. So there was a few years there where we were like, well, let's talk and let's meet and we'll keep you updated on what we're doing. But no, we couldn't really put a pitch out there because there was nothing that seemed to solidify and feel right for us or for them until we got to the Million Tree campaign.
Yeah, and I'm thinking I just so often, groups, encouraged by the direction that the money is going in and, not wanting to change their mission. So I was just wondering how strategic it was since, clearly it took a number of years.
We have had other relationships where, the fit was completely wrong, and I actually had to say no in a couple of cases to corporations who wanted to support us, and they were pretty amazed to hear somebody say no.
Right, I bet. Can you talk at all about that? You used the term compatibility of brands. So how do you determine who's compatible with you?
Well, a lot of it just tends to, well, for one thing, something that we actually did a few years ago, we had an outside consultant who came in and helped us a little bit and did a little bit of a kind of an assessment of what was the image out in the public, kind of from a marketing standpoint of different industries. How were they perceived in terms of being positive or negative in terms of the environment? Financial services was seen as positive, for example. And I can't remember some of the others because, of course, the market changes. So this has been 5 or 6 years ago. And so some of those we tried following up on, and some were kind of a challenge. But a lot of it has to do with kind of intangibles. It's almost more image question. We have the question of what is our brand? Our brand is about, and, this is a point that I would make. A lot of times the biggest asset a lot of us have as organizations is our image, is our reputation in the community, and that's what I would call our brand. Tree People, we don't own property. We're sitting on city property, even with all our buildings, et cetera. We don't have huge assets. It's our reputation. So if a company, and with corporations, we always want to be careful about greenwashing. If a company has, for some reason, a reputation in the community for being, having created problems in the environment, or is for some reason unpopular in a certain community for whatever reason because they've just done bad PR, we have to be very careful about that because then it could, associating with them could challenge our work in the community. And in both of these cases where we had to say no, that was the case, where we just felt like, gee, it could really damage our credibility in the community if we were tied to this particular organization. So, we were happy to work with those companies in other ways, but we couldn't accept any grants from them.
Okay. And I'll also mention, too, that Lori Kaufman from Tree People was kind enough to anchor a 4-part series for us on marketing and communications, and she talked a lot about brand on one of them. So yeah. I encourage anyone to go listen to that session as well.
Yeah, she's the guru I go to whenever it's like, is this, will this fit our image correctly? And she's got the right instinct on it. So yeah, listen to those sessions.
She was great. Carissa, do you have any questions in queue?
At this time, there are no questions.
Okay, we've got a question online, Peter. How does Disney internally measure their success of their involvement in your projects?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I really know. This is a reality sometimes that corporations may get involved because they really want to be part of an immediate community, and sometimes they may get involved because they have a political requirement to do so, either internally or externally. To some extent, their involvement in the Million Tree campaign was, it's been very interesting because their initial interest in the Million Tree campaign, I think, was very much the encouragement of the mayor, the pressuring from the mayor, and they wanted to be certain that they kind of met that public obligation because a lot of others were getting on board. But, and they thought schools was a good match because, of course, they're into youth and education, and that's their audience. At the same time, now, a couple of years later, now that we've been doing this, we met recently with some of the foundation folks, and they are so excited now about the school program and being part of it. So I think a lot of that has to do with a connection of who their audience is and is it the right match. The entertainment industry is, of course, a very creative industry and one that changes and moves about. Disney is unique in their long-term stability, kind of within the industry, but the entertainment industry can be mercurial to work with.
All right, and I'll take one more question online, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you find it difficult to secure sponsorship/funding for educational programs, thinking about some organizations out there who don't do any kind of hands-on tree work, but rather only educational programs?
Actually, the fact that we do a lot of educational work is a huge benefit for us because a lot of times we're talking to funders strictly from an educational standpoint, and that urban forestry is the vehicle through which we achieve education. So that's one of the ways in which we message our work, is that urban forestry is a vehicle, is a means. And so that talking to entities that are focused on education, then we're looking at, well, how is environmental education helping students meet their goals in terms of science, in terms of, and we've developed curriculum over the years to help address those things. And so we tap into that wherever possible. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Peter. All right, so a couple announcements. One is that for folks who are interested in this overlapping topic of marketing and development, we actually sponsor the Community Tree Leadership Forum. We have 3 segments of it coming up this year. They'll be posted online, but September 14th in Raleigh, North Carolina, Christiane Darrigan-Miranda, who's Senior Vice President with Edelman, will do a session on marketing and specifically cause marketing. She'll also be presenting at the California Urban Forest Council meeting in October 6th and 7th in Temecula, California. And I forgot to mention, too, that the first one's the North Carolina Urban Forest Council meeting. But then also joining her at the October session will be Andy Robinson, who's a fundraising consultant. And then just Andy will be at the American Trails Conference for us in Chattanooga on November 18th. So I'll post those all. It'll be in the resource list as well, but follow up to this. So I put a link up on screen for anyone who completes this link for us. We not only appreciate it because it helps us develop our programming, but we will send you the link afterwards for where you can download the recorded session and a resource list going along with this. The next webcast session is Thursday, June 17th. It will be on off-season projects for tree planters. And with that, I want to thank our presenters, Teresa and Peter, all of the participants, and our sponsors, the Home Depot Foundation and the USDA Forest Service. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this concludes today's conference call. Please disconnect at this time.
Jarrett?